Hello again, book lovers, and it's time to talk about Empire of the Summer Moon by SC Gwynne. The subtitle of this is Quanah Parker and the Rise and Fall of the Comanches, the most powerful Indian tribe in American history. And that's what we get. Now, interested as I am in my magpie-like approach to history, I've read a few books about the story of the conquest of America by the Europeans, whether it be Northern or Southern Hemisphere, including D. Brown's famous 1970 contribution, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which I thought was a very powerful and interesting history book. When we open Mr. Gwynne's book, Mr. Gwynne possessing degrees in history from Princeton and Johns Hopkins, so I think you could say a qualified enough historian, and this is a very well researched book as well. We are confronted at the very beginning with a horrible torture. And here is the difference between Brown's book, and I will say here that Mr. Brown acknowledges this criticism. Bury My Heart is a one-sided story, and that was the story that Brown wanted to get out. The horrible torture to which I refer is committed by the Indians. And again, Indians, let's stop thinking of just Indians. There were obviously many tribes of Native Americans with a variety of different customs, different attitudes to war, to decency, for example. The Comanches were considered to be the tough nuts among all the Indians, and it was the last resort, the Comancheria as it was called, the large expanse of the surviving tribes who hadn't been sucked into civilization, in inverted commas. It was here that I learned about the 5 civilized tribes, the ones that had agreed to take the government offer of land, learning how to farm, etc, etc. But all of these nations belonged to this great landmass where as much looting and burning and raping and pillaging and chicanery went on as it did in Kazakhstan, China, Greece, Rome, wherever you like to mention in human history. Quanah Parker himself, and his name means something unpleasant. There was difficulty, it seems, in translating some of these Indians' names into polite English, let's say. Well, he was the son of a woman who had been abducted by the Indians when she was a child. This book spirals off into lots of stories like this. The white woman abducted but who lived with the Indians but then who still wanted to live with the Indians. And some very sad stories of women being dragged back into a civilized society against their will. But sad stories abound, as do tortures. So, trigger warning number 1 I have already given you, and that comes right at the beginning, but there's tortures all the way through, and some of them are so disgusting. It's, read the book if you want to know a part of what really happened. And back we go to this what really happened idea. Yeah, I don't want to excuse the idea of the invading forces conquering, lying, cheating, betraying, which is what the invading forces did. But then to shift from that to the idea that the Aztecs, the Incas, the Comanche and the like were nice little peace-loving people who liked to string beads and chant folk tales. Well, I think we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau very much to blame for that. But here in this book, we do get both sides of the story. And then again, we're talking about a large sweep of history, so it's not like the whites came and they pushed back the frontier. No, there was a lot of toing and froing, a lot of goings on. The Civil War erupted, and there we get, and I had no idea about this, tribes dividing into Confederate and Unionist tribes, depending on which side of the war they supported. And the story bowls along like an adventure story. Just over 300 pages. I turned down page 211 because as we got to the stage where it seemed that the white men were winning, the eruption of the Civil War led to chaos and anarchy in the Indian territories. It took a while for them to realise there weren't any soldiers. But the soldiers that there had been before weren't that effective anyway, and they certainly didn't go deep into Comanche territory. So As of page 211, we get a new class of Indian hunter. The inglorious beginnings of the Texas Rangers are covered here. Seemingly originally just a bunch of drunken and unfettered hooligans with a bit of a bloodlust, but brought into reign by various commanders who made their name in these Indian wars. They imposed a bit more discipline, they already knew better tactics. Certainly the doughty Mackenzie, who seemed to be almost immune to bad weather conditions and military setbacks. And in amongst all this, marvellous descriptions of that American countryside where they had to go up the wall of rock to find nothing but a huge plain of foot-high grass where they had to scratch their heads and wonder where the Indians had gone to. Oh, by the way, in all this, the US government invaders would have gotten nowhere without any Indian scouts. As with the old divide and rule algorithm, that's what you do, isn't it? You find people that really don't like the bulk of the enemy, you enlist them, and then they're on your side and quite happy to track down the other Indian tribes that had wronged them in the past. Towards the end of the book, we get the story of Isatai, the medicine man who became a sort of venerated figure amongst all the Indian tribes who claimed to have magical properties and would finally defeat the enemy. Fortunately he didn't, but nothing happened to him. As with him, Kana went on to live a long and, you could say, successful life. He had a large house, he had a lot of property, some of which was swindled out of him again later on, but his power and standing was enough to see him through. He seemed to be a great negotiator, a great warrior. People saw him pick up wounded comrades from the battlefield while on horseback with one hand, and although vilified by other Indians, was seen by many as the great leader who could at least see the way to the future and some kind of compromise, thin though it might be, with the white man. A great book, an exciting read. Here's the review from the New York Times Book Review, which is slapped on the front cover. Transcendent. Empire of the Summer Moon is nothing short of a revelation. Will leave dust and blood on your jeans. End quote. Yeah, I like that. It reeks of history, reeks of danger, savagery, and final conciliation. Also emblazoned on the front, we find it was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Well, I'm going to have to find out what year that was and read the winner, because it'd be difficult to find a better book than this one.